The elephant lay half submerged in thick swamp mud, his body pressed into the earth as though the land itself refused to let him go. His vast frame, usually a picture of power and motion, had stilled under the heavy weight of exhaustion. Only the rise and fall of his ribs betrayed that life remained. Each breath was slow, shallow, and laced with strain. His tusks tilted awkwardly to one side, half buried, catching the faint glint of light above the swamp water. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and still water. Around him, reeds trembled in the breeze to slate to shift the mud that clung to his flanks. Insects gathered at his skin, and the faint sound of distant bird calls broke the silence, reminders of a world carrying on beyond his struggle. He lifted his trunk once, weakly, and let it fall back into the mire with a muted thud. From the edge of the swamp, figures emerged, a small group of rangers, drawn by reports of strange sounds deep in the wetlands. Their boots sank softly into the damp soil as they moved closer, their eyes locked on the unmoving shape ahead. At first glance, it could have been mistaken for a mound of earth, but then the faint flicker of the elephant's ear gave it away. The rangers slowed, understanding the fragility of the moment. One of them whispered under his breath, almost as though speaking to himself, "He's been here a long while." The others said nothing, their silence carrying both concern and respect. They kept their distance at first, giving the animal room even as they read the scene before them. The mud had gripped tightly round his legs, pulling him deeper each time he shifted. Marks in the soil told the story, repeated efforts to rise, each ending with greater entrapment. The elephant's eye turned faintly in their direction, glistening with the sheen of fatigue. There was no aggression in it, only the heavy weight of endurance nearing its edge. He let out a deep, trembling rumble, not loud, but enough to ripple through the stillness. It was a sound of life, of struggle, a reminder that he had not yet surrendered. The rangers crouched, studying the ground. They noted the softness of the earth, the way water had seeped beneath, turning the swamp into a trap. This was no shallow mud hole. It had the weight of time and depth, enough to hold even an elephant fast. Their movements were measured, their voices low. There was no rushing, no loud commands, only careful thought about what would come next. The elephant shifted again, trying to pull his right leg free. The mud sucked tight, holding him as his body trembled from the effort. He let out a long sigh through his trunk, a weary exhale that misted faintly above the swamp's surface. The rangers waited for him to settle, not daring to interfere until he had stilled again. Respect guided every step. Around them, the swamp's quietness deepened. The usual chorus of frogs and insects seemed distant, as though the land itself held its breath. The rangers knew the animal had likely been trapped since the early hours of the morning, perhaps longer. His skin was marked with dried streaks of mud from earlier thrashes, now stiff and cracked under the midday heat. Each detail spoke of hours lost to the slow pull of exhaustion. One ranger reached a hand to his satchel, pulling free a coil of rope, though he did not move closer yet. "Easy, big one," he said softly, his voice carrying no force, only calm. The elephant's ear flickered at the sound, a tiny acknowledgement in the silence. The rangers exchanged glances, their expressions carrying both determination and the quiet burden of responsibility. They knew the swamp had taken hold of the elephant, and freeing him would be no simple task. Yet in the stillness of his labored breath and the faint plea in his eyes, they also knew they had no choice but to try. For now, they simply stood with him, men and animals, bound together by the quiet weight of the swamp's hold. The struggle had begun, though the first step was not action but understanding. Reading the stillness that clung to the mud, the body, and the air dot and in that silence, a promise formed. The attempt would be made, no matter how long it took. The ropes were uncoiled slowly, their coarse fibers dampened by the swamp's mist. Wooden planks were carried forward, laid gently at the edges of the mud where the ground began to firm. Every movement was measured, every sound kept low. As though the swamp itself could chatter if disturbed, the elephant shifted once more, a slow and weary motion, his legs sinking a fraction deeper. The rangers froze, letting him settle again before inching closer. They had seen such struggles before, but never with a creature of this size caught so deep. His great shoulders trembled as he tried to brace, his trunk sweeping across the mud for something solid, something that might hold his weight. Each attempt only stirred the muck, and the earth pulled harder, unwilling to release what it had claimed. The ranger's eyes followed his movements, reading his exhaustion, the sagging of his ears, the dull but steady flare of his ribs. One of them bent low, pressing a hand against the planks to steady them in the mud. Another wrapped a rope carefully around the tree root, testing its strength before letting the other and trailed toward the elephant. They spoke in whispers, their words more for each other's reassurance than for any plan yet set in stone. Slow. We must go slow. Their tone carried no command, only the rhythm of caution. The elephant gave a low rumble, deep and muffled, vibrating through the swamp's still air. It was not a call of anger, but of effort, the sound of lungs drawing what little strength they could. He shifted again, his front legs pushing faintly, and the ropes were guided around his body, looped with as much gentleness as the moment would allow. His skin, caked with layers of hardened mud, felt cool and cracked beneath their hands. The first pull came with the strength of many arms straining together. The ropes tightened, the planks pressed deeper, and for a moment the great body leaned forward as though it might rise. But the earth answered with its own grip, sucking his legs further under, until the water around him rippled with the weight of the struggle. The rangers fell still again, breathing heavily in the silence, their faces carrying the quiet edge of frustration. They had moved him inches, but at a cost. The elephant's trunk lifted, swaying toward them before collapsing into the mud once more. His eyes flickered open, dark and weary, and though there was no human expression there, something in the depth of it urged them not to step back. His breath came in bursts now, quickened by the effort, chest quivering under the strain. He did not thrash. He did not resist. He only endured, waiting for what they might try next. The rangers adjusted the ropes, pulling at different angles, shifting the planks to spread his weight across firmer ground. Each time they leaned their weight into the effort, the sound of rope straining filled the air, mixed with the wet pull of mud loosening and tightening again. Sweat traced lines through the dirt on their faces, but their movements remained steady, calm, as if the very act of composure could help hold the animal's will. Easy. Big one, a ranger murmured, his voice carrying softly across the swamp. The elephant's ear twitched faintly, a sign of life in the heavy stillness. Again they pulled. This time his body rocked forward, one leg straining above the surface before sinking again with a hollow splash. The silence that followed was heavy. The swamp's birds had gone quiet, and even the usual insect chorus seemed dimmed by the gravity of the moment. The men glanced at one another, the unspoken truth clear in their faces. Each attempt drained not only the elephant's strength, but their own. Yet when their eyes returned to him, they found the same quiet plea waiting. His gaze did not waver, even as his head sank lower, trunk half buried in mud. In that gaze, they read no surrender. There was only endurance, the same force that had carried him through countless seasons of drought and flood. It was enough to steady their resolve, enough to bring their hands back to the ropes. Their boots firm against the swamp edge, the battle with the earth was far from over. But in the silence between breaths, in the soft rise of mud-stained ribs, the rangers understood that the elephant had not given up, and as long as he fought to breathe, they would not stop fighting to pull. The ropes had grown heavy in their hands, stiff with mud and water, Yet the rangers held them as though they were threads of life. Hours had stretched into long passages of silence broken only by the sounds of breath, their own, and the elephants, slow, uneven, echoing across the swamp. Each attempt had given them inches, then taken more back. The ground was patient, relentless in its grip. The men, too, had become quiet. Their determination carried not in words, but in the way their boots dug into the soil, and their shoulders leaned into the strain. The elephant lay trembling in the mire, ribs quivering with every labored inhale. His skin bore the marks of the struggle, streaks of hardened earth, cracked and darkened under the sun, layered upon fresher patches of wet mud that glistened faintly. His eyes were half closed, yet still they moved, shifting with the slow awareness of the men at his side. He did not resist the ropes. He did not fight them. He only endured. A ranger knelt close to the swamp's edge, fingers pressing against the planks that had been pushed deeper into the mud to form some kind of pathway. The wood creaked under the weight, but it gave the men a footing they had not had before. With each shift, they had tried to loosen the earth around the elephant's legs, digging at the edges, creating channels for water to flow, hoping the suction would weaken. It had worked in fragments, a small release of pressure here, a tremor of movement there, but not enough to free him fully. The men adjusted the ropes again, looping one higher across his chest, another angled to his hindquarters. They spoke only in murmurs, their voices barely rising above the swamp's quiet. Together now, one said softly. It was not a command, but a rhythm, a way to steady their hands for what they knew would be the final attempt. The elephant stirred, his trunk lifting from the mud with effort. He swung it faintly toward them, brushing the surface of the ropes, then letting it fall again with a muted splash. His body trembled as though on the edge of collapse. Yet beneath the exhaustion there was something held tight, the thin but steady thread of survival. The rangers braced themselves, leaning into the ropes, muscles strained, breaths hissed through clenched teeth. The cords pulled taut, cutting lines into their palms. At first, nothing moved but the slight groan of wood beneath their feet. The elephant remained still, the swamp unbroken. But then, from deep beneath the surface, came the slow, reluctant shift of earth releasing what it had swallowed. The mud trembled, a hollow suction breaking as water surged into the gaps. The elephant's body rocked forward, his front legs heaved, shoulders rising a fraction, then sinking again. The men did not let go. They pulled harder, their bodies bent low, every ounce of weight thrown backward against the swamp's hold. The ropes creaked, mud clung, and the world seemed caught in the silence of that struggle. Then, suddenly, the ground gave way. A sound tore through the swamp. Not a cry, not a shout, but the raw rip of suction breaking free. The elephant lurched forward, his massive body sliding across the planks, crashing down onto firmer soil. The ground shook beneath him as he landed, knees buckling, chest pressed low. Water and mud sprayed outward, the swamp finally surrendering what it had held. For a moment, no one moved. The elephant lay still, sides heaving, his trunk stretched out before him. He was free, but not yet risen. His body quivered, each muscle trembling from the strain of hours spent battling the earth. The men stood in silence, breathing hard, their hands slack on the ropes that now hung loose across the ground. They did not rush forward, did not crowd him. They only watched, their stillness a mark of respect for what had just unfolded. The elephant drew a long breath, deeper than any they had heard before, the sound resonant and heavy. His ears flapped faintly, mud shaking free in small clumps. He remained on his knees, as if the memory of the swamp's grip still bound him. His eyes, dark and weary, opened wider, scanning the open space around him. There was no fear in them, only the careful testing of freedom after so long held down. The rangers shifted back, giving him room. One of them whispered, "You're out now. Take your time." His words were carried softly, not as if the animal could understand, but as if the land itself needed reminding. The elephant's trunk curled against the ground, dragging through grass that had not been touched by mud. He inhaled its scent, lifting faintly, before collapsing back down again. The gesture was small, almost invisible, but it was the first sign that the ordeal had ended. Slowly, his body leaned forward. With a low groan that rumbled from his chest, he braced his legs beneath him. The first attempt faltered. His weight sank back into the earth, though now it was solid ground beneath him. The second came with more strength, his shoulders rising higher, his chest lifting as his trunk pushed against the soil. His legs shook violently, but they did not give way. Inch by inch, the massive body rose until he stood, though unsteadily, on all fours. Mud clung to him in thick sheets, dripping slowly back into the swamp he had escaped. He remained still, breathing heavily, ears lifting and falling with each exhale. The men did not move closer. They only stood, their silence carrying the weight of all. They had seen elephants walk, run, even charge, but to see one simply stand after such a battle was more powerful than any display of strength. The elephant rumbled, low and resonant, a sound that echoed into the trees beyond. It carried far, rolling like thunder through the still air. The rangers exchanged glances, a flicker of recognition passing between them. It was not for them, this call. It was for the forest, for something unseen. The swamp behind him lay quiet now, broken only by the slow trickle of water filling the gaps his body had left. The struggle was finished, though its mark would remain in the deep gouge and splashes across the mud. The elephant turned his head slightly, ears spreading wide, as though listening for an answer to the call he had given. For long moments, there was only silence. Then, from the distance, came a faint reply. Another rumble, deeper still, carried on the air. It was distant but clear, a voice answering his own. The elephant lifted his trunk faintly, his body steadying with the sound. His ordeal had ended, but what lay beyond this moment was something no one could have expected. The rangers lowered their ropes, their hands falling to their sides. They had given all they could. The rest would belong to him, and to the voices waiting in the forest. The elephant shifted, his massive frame trembling less now. He stood firmly on the earth, free at last from the swamp's hold. And though his knees still shook, his eyes were no longer heavy with exhaustion. They held instead the quiet strength of survival, the weight of a battle fought and won. The air stilled around him, and for the first time since the struggle began, the swamp felt quiet, peaceful. The men did not step closer, nor did they turn away. They remained in their places, bearing witness to the moment the earth had given back what it had nearly taken. The elephant had been released, and in his release, something greater had been set in motion. The elephant stood unsteady, his frame still dripping with mud and trembling from the effort it had taken to free himself. His chest lifted and fell in slow waves, each breath filling the silence around the swamp. The rangers had already stepped back, their ropes slack upon the ground, their hands hanging loosely at their sides. There was no more work left for them to do. The struggle was finished. What remained was only to witness what came next died at first. The air held nothing but the sound of his heavy breathing, the slow trickle of water sliding back into the hollows his body had left. Then, from deep within his chest, a sound rose, low, resonant, and unhurried. It was not the strange rumble of before, but something fuller, carrying across the land like a call carried by the earth itself. The men looked at one another, each recognizing the weight of the sound. It was not directed at them. It was reaching for something unseen. The elephant lifted his trunk faintly as the rumble grew. his ears spreading wide though still streaked with mud. His body swayed as though the very effort of calling cost him strength, but he did not stop. The sound rolled outward, echoing beyond the swamp's edge and into the distant forest. Then silence returned, so complete it felt as if the land itself had stilled to listen. A moment later, the answer came, a reply, distant, deep, unmistakable. Another elephant's rumble, threading its way back through the trees. The sound struck the rangers like a sudden wind, both startling and quieting them further. The freed bull shifted his weight, steadier now, his ears twitching at the recognition. The forest began to stir. Branches moved, not with the breeze, but with the steady push of bodies making their way forward. Leaves shook, brush bent aside, and then, from the shadows of the trees, they appeared. One by one, massive shapes emerged, silent until this moment, their footsteps muffled in the thick grass. A small herd, waiting just beyond the swamp's edge, revealed itself at last. The rangers froze where they stood, their boots rooted in the damp earth. Their work had always carried them close to elephants, but rarely like this. Rarely at such a threshold between life saved and life returning to its own. They did not move. They did not speak. Their silence was their respect. The herd came slowly, their eyes fixed on the bull who had been trapped. The first to reach him was a female, her ears fanning outward as she lowered her trunk across his flank. She touched him with deliberate care, brushing along the mud-caked skin as though mapping the edges of his ordeal. He responded with a low groan, shifting toward her touch, steadying himself against it. Behind her, another followed, younger but strong, pressing closer until his trunk swept across the bull's shoulders. Then another, smaller still, barely reaching the bull's knees, moving hesitantly before finding its place at his side. One by one, they surrounded him, a circle of trunks and tusks, a living wall around the one who had been trapped. The bull swayed, lowering his head, his trunk trailing lightly over the back of the calf at his side. His body trembled still, but the tremor was met now by the press of others leaning into him, steadying him not with ropes, but with presence. The rangers stood in quiet awe, their work eclipsed by the simple power of reunion. A ranger whispered under his breath, barely audible. They were waiting for him. The words dissolved quickly into the still air. Not meant to linger, the herd remained close, silent except for the soft rumbles that passed between them. The sounds were low, almost felt more than heard, rolling through the ground and into the air. Each tone seemed to answer another, a quiet conversation of reassurance and recognition. The bull's ears twitched at every sound, his eyes closing as though the vibrations themselves were enough to steady him. For the rangers, the moment stretched long. They had worked with all the tools they knew, strained against the earth's grip, risked their strength and patience to pull him free. But what they watched now required none of that. The herd needed no tools, no planks, no ropes. They only offered presence, and it was enough. The bull lifted his trunk again, pressing it against the flank of the female at his side. She stilled, receiving the touch, and then rumbled softly in return. Mud slid slowly from his skin, dripping onto the ground in thick clumps. Beneath it, the raw marks of the swamp remained, streaks and abrasions where the earth had held so tight. But the herd did not pause at the sight. They brushed him with trunks, touched the worn places gently, and filled the silence with their sound. The rangers felt themselves caught between two worlds, the labor of their own hands, and the deeper rhythm of nature reclaiming its own. Neither diminished the other. Both were part of the same story. Gradually, the bull straightened, his stance firmer with each passing moment. Supported not by ropes, but by the nearness of his herd, he began to carry his weight differently, as though the swamp's memory no longer bent his body so low. His head lifted, ears fanning wide again. He rumbled once more, the sound fuller now, and the herd answered in unison. A chorus rising into the sky, the rangers remained still, their breath caught in the shared vibration. They had freedom with sweat and strength, but this was beyond them. It belonged to the elephants alone that as the chorus faded, the herd tightened their circle briefly, trunks brushing one last time across the bull's sides. Then, as though guided by an unspoken rhythm, they began to shift, turning slowly back toward the forest. The bull hesitated, his body swaying faintly, before stepping with them. His movements were stiff, marked by exhaustion, but he followed nonetheless, drawn by the steady presence around him. The rangers watched as the line of elephants moved into the trees, the bull at the center, guarded on every side. The forest received them quietly, branches bending, leaves shivering at their passage. Soon, only the sound of their steps remained, fading deeper into the land. One ranger let out a breath he had not realized he'd been holding. Another rested his hand lightly on the rope still lying in the mud, as though reluctant to move just yet. They all knew the moment was not theirs to interrupt. They had been witnesses, nothing more, nothing less. The swamp lay quiet again, broken ground where the bull had once been held. The rangers remained for a time, standing in the silence, until even the last echoes of rumbles had faded into the forest. What they had expected was release. What they had been given was a reunion, and it was more powerful than anything their hands could have built. The land grew still once more, but the image remained, the bull, trembling yet steady, surrounded by the touch of his herd, welcomed back by the voices that had waited for him. The herd lingered at the swamp's edge, their massive bodies forming a shield of patience around the bull, who had only just escaped the earth's grip. He stood among them, breathing in slow rhythm, his trunk swaying lightly as if testing the air for strength. His legs trembled still, but not as they had before. The tremor carried less of desperation now, more of recovery, the unsteady balance of one who was remembering how to stand. The rangers remained silent, watching from a respectful distance. Their work was done, yet their presence felt tethered to him. They had pulled with ropes and planks, strained with every ounce of their strength. But what they saw now was no longer about their hands. It was about the quiet, unwavering power of a herd reclaiming one of its own. The bull shifted, placing one heavy foot forward. The ground beneath it held firm, not the sucking pull of mud, but the solid earth that stretched toward the trees. His weight pressed down, the soil yielding slightly under his immense frame, and he leaned into the step. A low rumble left his chest, answered almost immediately by the female at his side. The sound rolled through the group, a soft chorus of reassurance. He took another step, and then another. Each movement was deliberate, his body swaying, muscles stiff from the ordeal. Yet with every step, the tremor lessened, replaced by the steadier rhythm of walking. The younger elephants brushed against him as he moved, their trunks touching his legs, his flank, the ridge of his shoulder, not guiding him, but reminding him he was not alone. The swamp behind them settled into silence. Water seeped back into the hollow his body had left. Reeds bent slowly back to their places. Insects returned to the air. The land closed over the scene, but the memory of the struggle remained etched in the gouges and splashes of mud along the bank. The rangers did not follow. They stood rooted where they were, letting distance form between themselves and the herd. A ranger murmured softly, almost to himself, "He's going home now." The words did not travel far, but the others heard them, and no one spoke again. The forest accepted the elephants without resistance. The first trees stretched tall above them, their branches rustling faintly in the light breeze. Shafts of sunlight broke through the canopy, striking across the bull's back as he stepped beneath the shade. The herd moved slowly, matching his pace, their formation shifting to keep him at the center. His ears flapped gently, shedding clumps of dried mud that fell in soft thuds to the earth. His trunk lifted higher now, curling toward the leaves overhead, brushing them before lowering again. Each gesture carried the quiet assurance that he was regaining himself, not fully yet, but enough to walk into tomorrow. The rangers remained where the forest met the swamp. Their faces were lined with exhaustion, their clothes streaked with mud, but their stillness was filled with something more than weariness. They watched until the last of the herd slipped deeper into the trees, their massive forms blending with the shadows and shafts of light. The bull paused once, his body half hidden in the greenery. He shifted his head, ears wide, trunk swaying faintly. A low rumble traveled back through the air, deep and steady. It was not a call for help, nor a cry of struggle. It was a sound of presence, of survival, carried back toward those who had given him the chance to walk again. The rangers stood silent, the sound sinking into them. They knew it was not meant as gratitude in the way humans understood it, but still, it marked the bond of the moment, the crossing of lives at the edge of the swamp. Then he turned and moved on, following the herd into the forest depths. The sounds of branches brushing against tusks, the faint thud of massive feet pressing into earth, grew fainter until they were gone. Only the forest remained, closing gently behind them. The swamp returned to its stillness. Birds called again from distant trees, their voices filling the air where silence had hung. Insects swarmed low over the water, their hum steady and endless. The rangers gathered their ropes slowly, coiling them with care, wiping mud from the planks before stacking them aside. Their work was complete, yet their movements carried none of the relief of a task finished. Instead, there was the quiet heaviness of having witnessed something far beyond their strength. They looked once more toward the forest. Its shadow swallowed all traces of the herd, leaving only the memory of trunks brushing against flanks, of the bull trembling on his knees, of the slow, deliberate steps that carried him forward. The men turned then, their boots sinking softly into the wet earth as they walked back the way they had come. The swamp behind them would not remember. It would close over its scars, water smoothing the mud, reeds standing tall again. But the image would remain with those who had been there, the sight of a giant rising, surrounded by the patient strength of his own kind. The day moved toward its end. The sky deepened, streaked with the fading light of the sun as it fell low on the horizon. Shadows stretched long across the land, and a soft wind moved through the grass, bending it in waves. The forest held its silence now, save for the faintest sound, the distant, almost imperceptible rumble of elephants moving deeper, carrying one of their own with them. The rangers paused once more before leaving. None spoke. They did not need to. What they carried could not be set down in words. The swamp lay behind, the herd ahead, and between them lingered the memory of trust, of resilience, of the moment the earth let go. And as the sun slipped lower, painting the land in the quiet glow of evening, the image settled like a promise that life, no matter how heavy the earth's hold, will find a way to rise and walk into tomorrow.